Good afternoon. I'm Bill Nice, and I'm the Associate Director of the Institute for Security, Technology, and Society here at the college. Today we're very fortunate, and this is our last speaker in our spring speaker series on state-sponsored hacking. We have with us Professor Dickie George from Johns Hopkins University. Brief introduction, Dickie graduated from Dartmouth in 1970, all right, joined the NSA immediately thereafter, and spent the next 41 years with the NSA. About 5.5 years ago, he joined the Advanced Physics Laboratory at Johns Hopkins University, and today he's here with us to talk about intelligence and espionage. Dickie?
Thanks very much, Bill. It's great to be back here. I love coming back up to Hanover. It's wonderful times. There's the obligatory, what you're going to hear is my view of things, my opinions. These have been vetted by public affairs, but doesn't mean that they believe that they're true. It's just it's my view on things. And since my memory goes back a long way, most of those public affairs people have no idea what happened back then. So it's a good life. So to start off, I feel like I've been a target of espionage for about 47 years. Doesn't mean they were successful. It just means I've been a potential target. The good news is today there are a lot more people like you all who are targets of espionage every day. So welcome to the club. It's a fun club. Information assurance, which is where I spent my life, it really is all about protecting information. It means that you have information that someone wants access to do something to it, and you want to protect that information, and that's the name of the game. If you think about a threat in an adversary, you can characterize that adversary in 6 ways. You talk about the resources they have to spend and the capabilities they have. Those are somewhat interchangeable because if they don't have a capability, they may be able to buy the capability from somebody else. There's the intent and motivation, what they want to do and why they want to do it. There are a lot of different groups that might want to do the same thing, but for very different reasons. If you think of a hospital database of information, a disgruntled employee might want to just mess things up because he's mad at the hospital. Organized crime might want to go in there and encrypt the database, so they want access to it to encrypt it so they can ransom it back to the hospital. A foreign nation state might want to go in there and just implant a tool so that they can do something at a chosen time if they want to. A terrorist might want to just go in there and make people die. So there are a lot of different reasons people might want to have access to that. And you've got to address those various reasons in your game. Now, if you think back to the old Cold War, and I'm usually talking to college kids. This is great because most of you lived through that Cold War. It was a fun time. It was characterized by 2 things. The espionage was number 1, and the technology race, which is broken up into nuclear weapons and the space race. So those were the 2 things. And you can cartoon it in a sense by saying you were looking at someone who had the best guns and the best spies. And that was what you were looking for, the best guns and the best spies. Funny thing used to happen back then when I was in elementary school. About once a month an alarm would go off and we'd all dive under our desks because the threat was someone was dropping an atom bomb on our school. So it's a little school in Connecticut. Probably not a great target. But the interesting thing about that was that everybody understood the threat, and they knew how they were supposed to react to the threat. And about 2/3 of the kids in my class, when they went home, they had bomb shelters in the basement. And the bomb shelters were stocked because the government told them how to build that shelter, how thick the cement had to be, how much food and water they had to have in it, how blankets, what had to be there to protect them, how long they had to be protected for, and the government told them what they were doing to prevent this attack from happening in the first place. Now compare that to today. What kind of advice is the government giving you on the cyber threat? And what kind of assurances are you getting that nothing's going to happen? Don't worry. Probably not much. So I have an interesting story that will kind of bring that to light. I was talking to a very senior guy at the Department of Defense one time, and he said, this was in the late 90s. He said, I have nuclear weapons. I said, yes, sir. He said, you know, I might have to use those nuclear weapons someday. And I said, yes, sir. And he said, so when I see that cyber attack coming, and I thought, this guy's thinking he's going to see ones and zeros coming through the air like it's a missile, and that's not the way it works. And so I said, sir, what do you do when it looks like that cyber attack is coming from Ohio? And he kind of just stared up at the ceiling. And, you know, you could say, well, is he thinking, why is Ohio attacking the Pentagon? Or if I take out Ohio, it's a swing state, so it's fair. If I take out Ohio, does that send a message to the world? But I think what he really was thinking was, I've got the biggest guns, and you're telling me I don't know how to use them. You know, the game has changed, and he got a real sad look on his face as he realized that having the biggest guns didn't mean he was the toughest guy anymore. And that's a profound difference in the world. I heard a talk that General McChrystal gave a couple months ago, and he said, you know, there's only one superpower, and it's us. And no one on Earth is ever going to take us on head-to-head in a traditional war again. That means we've got to learn how to fight a different war. You saw the recent results in the NATO competition, where in the cyber competition we came in 13th in NATO, which is a marked improvement over last year when we came in last. That's not where we want to be. That's not where we need to be. And that's in NATO. So when I started in NSA, there was an old guy. We were a bunch of kids. We were a bunch of 22-year-olds. There was an old guy sitting in the back of the room. That probably means he was about 30. So we were having a good time. The second day, he got up at the end of the day and stood up and said, I want you guys to know that the Russians know who every one of you are. They're targeting you. They're looking for you to make a mistake. As long as you don't do anything wrong, you're okay. But if you give them an opportunity, they're going to take advantage of that. And over the years, I have seen that happen. Not to anyone I know, but to people we hear about. That as long as you play the game right, you're fine. If you give them an opportunity, they will take advantage of it, and you will become owned. So when they set up the rules for how we play this game, it was set up back in the day of teletypes, where you were typing out information, it would go over the air, and it would get printed out at the other end. And CIA was supposed to get the information at rest, and NSA was supposed to get the information in motion. It doesn't really make much sense in today's world, because there's not much difference between at rest and in motion today. That information is sitting in computers, and it could be moving at one moment, rest in the next, and moving again. It's an interesting world. So let me talk a little bit about the kind of defense we put together, because we knew the Russians were looking to get strategic information. That was their aim, to get strategic information about the United States, and our aim was to keep them from doing it. So we developed crypto, and the information was encrypted. Information assurance tries to make life hard for the adversary, and making it hard means forcing them to play the game they don't want to play. So remember, you have resources, capabilities, intent, motivation, access, and risk aversion. Access, what kind of access do they have to the information? Risk aversion, what kind of chances are they willing to take? An example of how we built devices back then. We had a handheld radio which was used at the front lines. It was called Vinson. Some of you may remember that. It was a device that was first designed in 1957. We studied it for about 12 years. In '69, we decided we could start building it. And they made 4 models as they kept finding problems and fixing them. And it was actually fielded in 1976. So that's only 19 years to get it from design to the field. It's still in the field 40 years later, and it's never had any changes. And that was the goal. You make something right. You know the old story about the 2 hunters and the bear Does everybody know that? Okay, so there are two hunters out there in the woods, and they've only got one bullet left, and a big bear jumps up in front of them. The guy says to his friend, make it a good shot. And he said, I will. And he turns around and shoots his friend in the leg and takes off running. The guy says, what are you doing? He said, well, I don't have to outrun the bear. I just have to outrun you. So that's almost the game in cyber. Back in the old days, our crypto was designed to outrun the bear. Today, the game is very much designed for people to outrun the neighbor. If your system is better than your neighbor's, you're probably not going to get hit unless you're a real target. If you're a target of opportunity, you're fine as long as you're more protected than somebody else. But if everybody's equally protected, then they're going to look for the most lucrative target. And that's the game we have to play. I remember I was giving a talk down at Georgia Tech one time, and people were complaining about this. They had never seen this kind of thing before. It was back in the early 2000s, and suddenly everybody's getting hit, and what's going on? And I said, there's nothing new here. This is stuff that's been happening over the years. It's just that you are now targets. And they said, well, you can't let that happen. And I was at NSA at the time, and they said, why don't you look at all that stuff that's coming into the country and make sure that none of it is bad, and only send me the stuff that I should be reading. I said, really? There are a lot of people that don't want me looking through all of their mail and deciding what they should read. It's interesting that you all think that's the right thing to do. And there is that privacy security trade-off, that's a very strange characterization of it. But that's one way to look at it, that we don't really have the power to decide what a person gets to read and what a person doesn't get to read. And we can't make decisions for them. We can't make good risk management decisions for them. Everybody makes risk management decisions every day. When the light turns red and you're walking across it, you make the decision that car coming towards you is actually going to stop at that red light. If it doesn't, your risk management decision is lost. If there's 30% chance of rain and you don't take an umbrella, it's a risk management decision. The difference between those decisions and cyber decisions is when you make that decision to cross the street or to not carry an umbrella, if it's a bad decision, you suffer for it. In the cyber world, we're all connected. And somebody making a bad decision can impact everybody else. If somebody gets into the Dartmouth network, you all can suffer for that. It's a very different world. So let's talk a little bit about some of the old spy cases that we've seen. We used to see, back when it was us and the Russians in the good old days, we used to see about one a decade because they were hard to do. So you had Martin and Mitchell. Martin and Mitchell were guys who worked at NSA. They worked in the research department. The fairly typical description of the people. They thought they were really good, and the people they worked for didn't think they were that good. So they were a little bit disappointed, disillusioned. They defected to Russia. They had access to a lot of information that we would prefer the Russians not have access to. But that's the game the Russians were playing. They honed in on the fact that these guys were unhappy, and we can convince them that life is much better in Russia. Bring them over and take care of them. We'll get the information. You might even see somebody in today's world thinking that might be true. You never know. But that's one, and that was a bad one for us. Walker, you're familiar with the Walker case. In the old days, Walker was kind of the equivalent of today's system admin. Walker was a crypto custodian. So what that means is you had that Vincent, and the Russians knew what Vincent looked like. Vincent was fielded in '76. Interestingly, I was talking to a friend of mine at FBI, and the FBI hang around the same bars that the Russians do downtown. And he said, you might want to know that there's an offer out of $1 million for the first Vincent that's delivered to the Russian embassy. And he called up a week later and said the offer's been pulled. Yeah, I had already, we had a little box where you could turn in OFIs. We called them One Fine Idea. So as soon as I got that call, I turned in one fine idea. We should go run it down to the embassy because the IAD, the Information Assurance Directorate, could use $1 million. They're going to get it anyway. I I don't know if they took me up on the offer. I know I didn't get a cut. But it's pretty safe to assume that the Russians knew what Vincent looked like. We have engineering diagrams on all of our equipment. We had one company out on the West Coast that somehow lost one complete set of engineering diagrams for everything they ever built for us. Just one. Stuff happens. We were doing an audit one time of the company that was building Vincent, and there were classified chips missing while the project engineer was on vacation. And it turned out he was in China. And remember, this is back in the 70s. People did not vacation in China in the 70s. So it was gone. But that's okay, because what you count on is the crypto variable that no one but you knows. And we spent a lot of time making it so that it was stored in a way that nobody could get any information on it. It was good in there. You couldn't figure out anything about it. You couldn't take it out and put it back in. The only person who would get any information about that was the crypto custodian, who took it out and put it in the device. So Walker was, he needed money. He invested in a bar. It was losing money. So he walked into the Russian embassy with one of his little tapes and said, "I have these. Would you like to buy them?" And they said, "We can't buy those because people would know they were gone, but we'll give you a little camera and you can take pictures of them." And so he was taking pictures and selling them. And he wasn't making much money on it. Certainly nothing like the cost to us, unfortunately. But that's a guy, again, the money problems. Once the Russians knew that he had money problems, they were happy to be his friend and try to help him out. And that's what they're looking for, an opportunity to help someone out, to be their buddy, and then to own them for the rest of their lives. That's the model. The Great Seal. Remember the Great Seal that some third graders carved for the president? I've seen that Great Seal. I tell you, third graders did not carve that Great Seal. It is really nice. It also has a really nice listening device inside it. So it worked for a little while. And the modern day version of that, of course, is the State Department with the chair rail. Have you heard about that? So there was a D.C. policeman who saw a Russian diplomat doing something really funny. So he watched him for a while, and he figured this can't be on the up and up. So he called the FBI, and he said, "I got a Russian outside the State Department who's putting quarters in the parking meter." And the FBI came rushing over. Russians don't put quarters in the parking meter. They have diplomatic immunity. There's a guy in the Russian embassy who has 30,000 parking tickets in D.C. I don't know how you can collect 30,000 parking tickets. It's like he must drive around following policemen and intentionally parking in front of hydrants. It's got to be a hobby, but 30. So this guy was sitting there putting quarters in, and that looked suspicious. So the FBI came and they watched, and every once in a while he would move a box of Kleenex in the back seat, just sitting in the. So they said. So they went over and they hauled him out of the car, and they found a recorder inside the Kleenex. And when they went inside the State Department, they found that there had been an 18-inch piece of chair rail between a door and a corner that had been replaced, or perhaps hollowed out by maintenance. But it looked like it matched perfectly, but it had a transmitter inside it that was picking up whatever discussions were going on in the State Department. Now, I figure the joke is really on the Russians because they're not getting much intelligence out of that. But at least they were getting something. But that's the kind of thing that they will do, and that's supply chain is real. So if they can do that, they will do it. Another supply chain is Gunman, Project Gunman. That was in the 80s. Someone suggested that we might want to take a look at some of our equipment that was in the embassy over in Moscow, and so one weekend. We took about 1.5 tons of stuff out of that embassy and sent it back home. And we x-rayed it all, and we found that the only thing that had really been impacted was the typewriter. Now, the way that the embassy worked, they had the devices that actually, the crypto devices were in the basement, and the Russians didn't have access to that. They had teletypes and the crypto equipment down there. On the first floor, they had the typewriters, and they would type out the messages that were to be taken down to the basement to be encrypted and sent out. So when anything happened to the typewriters, which happened fairly frequently, it seemed in the morning after the Russians had been cleaning, the typewriters wouldn't work well. So they would send them out for maintenance. And they would come back, and there's a triangular stability bar under the keyboard. That had been replaced with one that looked identical, made out of the same stuff, but hollowed out with a recorder and a transmitter in it. So it would record the keystrokes during the day and transmit them at night. And that report's on the internet if anybody wants to read about it. It's really good-looking stuff. They did a really nice job for that time frame. But a lot of work that goes into that. Another funny thing that happened over there, we were looking at some cables that we had, which had pretty heavy metal ends, and we saw one that was cracked. And we said, what the heck happened? And they said, somebody must have put a desk on that or something. And we went around and we looked, and they were all cracked. All the cables had those metal ends cracked. So, if it was an accident, it was a big accident. But that's the kind of thing that happens to you, and you have to watch out for it. And you're making people work to get this. That's perfectly fair, and that's all according to the rules. There are rules that you abide by. I'm not worried about anybody kidnapping me or kidnapping someone in my family and trying to get me to turn over information. That's not the way the game is played. The game is played by you make yourself vulnerable, and they take advantage of it. And the Russians were going after strategic government information. You had the big guns, and you had the best spies. The spies were enablers for the guns, and they were getting that strategic information any way they could. And that's life. So here's a little game on the rules that you have to play by. We used to send teams over to the Russian embassy. In fact, when they were building it, we sent teams over there and looked at it, and the materials were not very good. Basically, the Russian economy was not that great. But every once in a while, you'd see a place where the cement was really pretty fine. And that was where listening devices were hidden. Now, we don't know that they weren't hidden in other places, but we found them hidden there. So we used to send people over to the embassy occasionally. There were always NSA people going over there. And interestingly, the only place that ever had any vacancies was one hotel on the 7th floor. So our guys would always stay on the 7th floor of this hotel. Then the KGB was on 6th and 8th floor, but that's okay. So we knew that. So one trip over, we sent a big team, and there weren't enough rooms on the 7th floor. So one of the guys was on the 5th floor. Of course, what did they do? The first thing those guys did was they all ran down to the 5th floor to see what's the difference between the 5th floor and the 7th floor. So that's not in the rules. They're supposed to be on the 7th floor. So there's a knock on the door. And outside the door, there's the guy from the front desk at the hotel. He said, I brought you a copying machine in case you want to make a copy of something. And he wheeled it in and plugged it in for them and left. Now, when's the last time somebody brought you a copying machine in your hotel room? So my guys were engineers, so they got suspicious. And they unplugged it. 5 minutes later, there was a knock on the door. It's the guy from the front desk at the hotel. He said, I brought you a new copying machine. That one's not working. So, yeah, I think it was his subtle way of telling them that they had broken the rule and they were supposed to be on the 7th floor, not on the 5th floor, to get back up there where they could hear what was going on. But it's a rules thing. When you're walking around Moscow, it's the safest city in the world for you because you've got three KGB guys in front of you, 3 KGB guys behind you. You don't know who they are, but nobody's going to come near you. You know that. Nobody's going to talk to you. I had one of my friends decided he'd go out late one night just to see what happened. He got a block. Somebody took him by the arm and escorted him back to the room and said he should not do that again because accidents do happen at night. He said he didn't think it was an idle threat. He thought that the guy really meant it, that they wanted to know where he was, and he should not be going out and doing things. But that's life. As long as you behaved, all was good. It was spy versus spy, and there was honor among spies. I've got a buddy. His name is Victor Shemov. He was the director of Information Assurance in the 70s for the KGB. He came over in 1980, and I've known him since then. We get together once a month just to have a crab cake and discuss the good old days when it was him and me and all the fun we had. And he likes talking about how nice it was to trust your enemy. One day we're sitting there, he said, I trusted you more than I trusted the Chinese, and they were my best ally. But I trusted you. I knew what you were doing, and I knew you wouldn't do anything that was outside of our rules. He said, I didn't trust the Chinese. In fact, he said, we had a relationship with the Chinese like your relationship with the British. I had people working over there in their intelligence as a Russian partner. He said, one of my guys came back. He'd been there for 15 years. He said, Victor, I don't trust these people. I don't know what they're up to. I just don't understand them. I don't trust them. You can't trust them. And so we're sitting in Timbuktu having a crab cake, and he grabs my arm and says, I want you to know, you can't trust the Chinese. And I'm thinking, I got a KGB guy here, and we're here eating a crab cake, and he's yelling at me that I can't trust Chinese intelligence. This is a great scene. But he's right. We don't trust them. One of the interesting things is, remember James Lewis when he worked for the Obama administration? He used to talk to the Chinese about espionage. He said his last trip over, he took it as a personal challenge to address the commercial espionage problem. So he said he opened the meeting as the senior U.S. rep was saying, we have to discuss commercial espionage. And his counterpart said, let's talk about cloud security. And so he said they talked about crap for the first morning. In the afternoon, he said, let's get on with the commercial espionage. And his counterpart said, now let's talk about... So at the end of the day, they hadn't gotten to commercial cryptography, and the meeting was over. The two of them were alone. And the Chinese guy said, you have to understand something. In your country, if you spy on another country, you're a hero. And then there's a line, a strong line. If you spy on another person, or if you spy on a company, you're a criminal. In my country, there's no line. If you spy for the country, you're a hero. And it doesn't matter whether you're spying on a government or a person or a company. And as long as we have that cultural divide, we can't talk about commercial espionage. And that's the story. There is a huge cultural divide, and the rules are very different. The Russians play by rules, and the Chinese don't, and other countries don't. And in today's world, the game has significantly changed. The big change is access. Back in the 70s, when we were building that Vinson, it was designed at NSA by people with top secret clearances. Having a top secret clearance doesn't mean you're not a spy. Ames, Pollard, it happens. Martin Mitchell. But it gives you some level of trust. Then it was built, and it was built by a company in the United States on a line that only built things for NSA. And we knew it was built the way we wanted it built. I spent 6 months with the engineering diagrams of that Vinson on a table, going through and looking at every line, every gate, every resistor in the thing, seeing what happened if something went wrong, and making sure that if something went wrong, it didn't go wrong in a catastrophic way, because we'd alarm it if it did. That's how well we built that thing. We knew it inside out. Built in the U.S. Today, there is no built in the U.S. It's international, and everybody has an opportunity to do what they want to do to us. I was talking to a big company one time. I was talking to the CEO, and he said, you know what makes me different from my competition? I will never use code from China. I will always use code that's built in the U.S. You have my word on that. 6 months later, I got a call from him. He said, I can't afford it. I'm getting my code from China. At least he called. And that's a fact of life. And that gives people an opportunity to do things. So in the year, I guess it was about 2005, they were talking about the critical infrastructure, particularly the communications infrastructure in the United States. They were taking bids from companies on maintaining that infrastructure. And the low bid came from China. So Congress established this committee of senior people from industry to look at that, to see whether it was a good idea or not, and I got to testify before them. And so testimony went something like this. They said, so is this a problem? And I said, it's a problem because you're allowing them access. And access gives them the opportunity to do something. So you are giving them complete access to the maintenance of your infrastructure. And if they want to make it, put a time bomb in it, anything they want to do, they have that access. And the chair said, so are you telling me that if we sign this contract, they are going to sabotage our infrastructure? I said, I cannot say that they are going to sabotage. I say you're giving them the opportunity to. He said, okay. So are you saying that if we don't sign this contract, our infrastructure is safe from the Chinese? And I said, I can't say that. You know, there could be other ways they could do something. He said, you're not being very helpful. You know, apparently I wasn't, because they were all, they're like, what the heck do we do? And so he said, could I talk to the next person? The next person was from the Commerce Department. And he said, it's a young lady, he said, did you hear that testimony? She said, yes, sir, I did. He said, what do you think? And she said, sir, if you are worried that if we sign this contract, the Chinese will sabotage our infrastructure, we'll put a clause in the contract that says they promise not to. And suddenly they all smiled. I said, oh, we solved that problem. You know, that's the life you live in. That's a kind of a failure to recognize that there is a problem. Today, you know, everybody's playing this game. It's not just the Russians. We knew the Russians were playing this game. You know, the Super Bowl was broadcast live to 235 countries outside the U.S. 4 of them have agreed not to spy on us. It's UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. Everybody else were fair game. We've talked about establishing a similar relationship with some other countries, but we've never been able to do it. And occasionally we do find people doing things that look suspicious. And we say, what the heck? And they say, you know, what do you expect? And that's kind of like what happens. You know, I expect that everybody else is going to be spying on us. And, you know, yeah, I'm an IA guy, but I assume that we're probably doing something similar. I don't know. I've never worked on that side of the house. But one can only assume that there is some intelligence gathering somewhere. It's an interesting life. There are some interesting stats on things. So in 1981, the first internet kind of emailing traffic, it wasn't really email, but that kind of traffic went. And it was a big expansion. Not much happened. By 1993, 1% of the two-way comms went over the internet. 1%. By 2000, it was 51%. And by 2007, it was 97%. It's a lot of information on the internet. It's a lot of opportunity for someone. And there are a lot of people that are looking to take advantage of that opportunity. It makes it a lot easier when stuff is floating all over the world on the internet and you don't know where it's come from or where it's going to. It goes through a lot of different countries, and that gives you access. And access is critical. It's a completely different game. If you think of Walker, I mean, he provided access because he walked into the Russian embassy. typically, you might be looking for someone who would establish a relationship in a bar. It's a long, painful process to set that up. You've got to gain trust. You've got to find a person who has a problem you can take advantage of. If the person turns you in, then that's a real risk because you lose that opportunity and you may be sent home. Today, you send an email to 10,000 people and you hope one of them clicks a button. You know, how smart do you have to be when someone sends you an email and says, if you click this button, I'll reset your password for you. Oh, I'll click that. That saves me the work. Yeah, really? People do that? And people do that. That click the button. I was talking to Scott Charney one time. He said he has to clean his computer every day. He's got a 4-year-old, and his mother lives with him, and they all use his computer. He said his son can't read, but he loves looking at YouTube things, particularly about animals. So he clicks, watches. Every once in a while, one of these little things pops up. He can't read. But he's learned that if he puts the mouse on that thing and hits it, he gets to see another video. So boink, boink, boink. He said his mother does a lot of traveling. She's a retired biology professor. Does a lot of traveling around the world. He's always looking to see what she might be seeing, what kind of shopping there might be, whatever. So he said she gets those windows up. He said he watched her one day. She was sitting in front of the tube, and over 3 minutes, she kept going closer and closer to the screen, like if she got close enough, those words were going to make sense to her. And after 3 minutes, she shrugged and hit OK. Yeah, I live this at home. Yeah, my brother's a travel writer. He goes all over the world. Every country he goes to, he gets hacked, and I get mail from him. And if I don't get to it first, my wife opens it. And invariably, our email address is Lissa and Dickie with no spaces. So invariably, the mail from my brother says, Dear Lissa and Dickie, and is signed Donald George. And whatever link you might enjoy this link, she clicks, and I get hit. And I say, why would you do that? She said, hey, don't complain to me, it's your brother. And I said, no, that's the whole point. It's not my brother. It's a fascinating life. And that's what happens. And so you used to hear that what we need to do is educate the end user. That's a losing game, because I'm never going to make my mother smart enough to know what that Russian guy is doing if he's aiming at her. It's just not going to happen. She's going to trust him. And she's going to share that risk with me. It's the way the game is played. The last information I have is from 2011 when I retired. The government had actual attacks. These are not pings, not somebody surfing by to see what it looks like. Actual attack, 41,000 attacks in that country. And it wasn't just the government. Remember RSA? They had access. Emailed to 1,000 people. One guy clicked it. They almost went out of business. And they had a good system. They had a really good system. They had a nearly perfect system. And that nearly came back to bite them. Lockheed Martin lost a lot of info. A lot of my info, by the way. NASDAQ lost a lot of money because guys were playing the timing game. They were getting the timing before anybody else was. It wasn't minutes. It was pieces of seconds, but that's enough. It's a great game. Mitsubishi, turns out that they don't make little electronics. They also make submarines. They lost a lot of stuff. DigiNotar, anybody remember them? DigiNotar was a certificate company. They issued certificates for companies. So when they got hacked, the bad guys issued themselves a lot of certificates and went around pretending to be a lot of different companies and patched a lot of products in a very bad way. DigiNotar is no longer in business. They didn't survive it. And that's probably fair. If you're going to put that much trust in a company like that, they ought to do it decently. Happens every day. Interestingly, there's not much concern about your credit card now because the credit card market is flooded. The credit cards are worth less than $1 a piece. Health information is the new target of interest because with your health information, people can be you or they can order drugs in your name. And apparently it's a neat way to get drugs. So health information is out there. The nasty part about this is it's pretty easy to get a new credit card. It's hard to change your blood type. And that kind of information kind of sticks with you over your life. So you don't really want to lose that kind of information. That's the world we're in. Attribution is really hard. It is really hard. You know, one of the sayings that my former friends used to like to say is, if it looks like the Russians, it's not. Unless they want you to know it's them. So, yeah. Okay, that's great. Now, the best guns and the best spies. The problem is in today's world. Remember that poor guy? He had the best guns, but you can't use those guns if you don't know who to shoot at. In this world, it's not best guns and best spies because the spies hold the guns. They can play a game. They can brick your critical infrastructure. And what do you do? What do you do if someone takes out your power grid? How do you respond? How do you recover? It's not easy. And the world is capable of doing it. You know, who could have shot a nuclear weapon at you in the 70s? Russia. Who could take down part of your power grid? The local high school. It's a completely different game. And what is the government doing to make sure that nobody does that to you? They named a cyber czar. They didn't give him any authority or money, but they named a cyber czar. And now the new cyber czar actually knows cyber, which is interesting because the last guy was a budget guy. And people who worked with him said he didn't know anything. But this guy knows a lot. However, without authorities and budget, knowing a lot doesn't buy you a lot. It's hard. It's really hard. One of my favorite things, did you ever take any of the awareness training where they look at things like, which of these 10 URLs are bad? And you get a 3-line URL, it's got 6 characters in interactive code. And, I got a snowball's chance of seeing that. And they tell you, this is what I love, don't open attachments you don't trust. Really? Who opens stuff you don't trust? It's like saying, don't eat spoiled meat. Oh, I'll take some of that spoiled meat. No, nobody does that. But people still get food poisoning because they don't really know it's spoiled. You automatically trust attachments. I get attachments from the guy who sits 10 feet from me. And I'm not going to turn around and say, did you just send me an attachment? I get 50 a day from him, and I open them all. Let's hope they're okay. But that's the world we're in, and it's everybody's sharing that risk. Everybody's sharing that risk. So, a good example of that is Buckshot Yankee, this risk sharing. Is anybody familiar with Buckshot Yankee? So that was when the Russians got into the classified network, which everyone claimed, we don't have to worry about the classified network because it's air-gapped. Well, it doesn't always work that way. So those Vincents on the front line have been replaced with laptops. And the guys in the Middle East were, their view was they're out there worried about terrorists. When they get a terrorist who happens to have a thumb drive in his pocket, or if they find a cave where it looks like the terrorists have been and they find thumb drives, they're thinking there might be information on this thumb drive. So I'm going to plug that thumb drive into my laptop and see what's in it. Because that guy is not worried about the terrorist putting malicious code on his laptop. He's worried about the terrorist shooting him. But it turns out that thumb drive didn't belong to that terrorist. That thumb drive was put in that cave by a Russian. And the Russian wasn't trying to put malware on that guy's computer. Well, he was. But it's not because he cared about that guy. He cared about the guys that guy was connected to. And that laptop wasn't just connected to the 6 other guys out there on the front lines. It was connected to the Pentagon. And it's that risk sharing that comes back to bite you. And that's the world that we live in. Every country on earth runs these types of attacks. They'll play these games. They're trying to take advantage because we are the best target. We have the innovation. We have the technology. We have the information. We have the money. You know the old story, why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is. We are the banks for the world. We have the money, and we are the targets. Everybody's got to live their life that way. I'm going to finish up with one story and then give you all a chance to ask questions if you want. So this is a story I like to use. It's a nice way of showing this idea of risk sharing and risk management and understanding risk. So in 2004, Mike Hayden, who was director of NSA, walked into my office and said, we're too quiet about the good things we do. I want us to be out there. I want us to be more public. I said, he's the director of NSA. What do you say? Yes, sir. And he said, so, I'm going to give the lunchtime keynote at Black Hat. And I said, well, that's a good first step, sir. You really are going to be out there. He said, yes, and I want you to give me the speech. He said, you don't have to write a speech. I just want the story. And I've got speech writers. And so I gave him what I thought was a pretty good story. And a week later, I got the speech back from his speech writers, and it was great. And so I called him up. I said, sir, this is outstanding. You are going to be a hit at Black Hat, I guarantee. And he said, thanks. And a week before the event, I got a call from his exec and said, General Hayden would like you to give the talk in his place at Black Hat. I said, well, the people at Black Hat are going to be a little disappointed when they're expecting to see General Hayden walk out on the stage and they get Dickie George. And she said, well, that's okay. The people who organized the event know that you'll be there. And so this is not a request. I say, now I am going to Black Hat to give the speech. And I said, well, how come? I thought he wanted to be out there. He wanted to expose NSA. And she said, well, you have to talk to, the name wasn't John Smith, but it was a friend of mine who runs security at NSA. So I called him up. I said, John, what the heck? I just got a call from the director. He wants me to give this speech in his place. And he said he wanted to get us out there. He said, go. I have some information, and it's rock solid, that if General Hayden shows up at Black Hat to give this speech, there's going to be an assassination attempt. So we got together yesterday. We talked about it. We decided you're not that good a target, so we'll take the risk. And I'm thinking, that's a discussion I would have liked to be in on. My view of acceptable risk might be different than theirs. But I went out and I gave the speech, and I swear, 3,500 people out there. If anybody reached for a napkin, I was going to be on the ground. Clearly, nothing bad happened. But being on the internet is much like that. Because when you get on the internet, there are people aiming at you every day. You got to be aware. You got to be looking for that. And understand that it's not just you, but your friend. When they make a bad decision, they're sharing that risk with you. And that's what espionage is today. It's no longer the Russians meeting a guy in a bar and taking 6 months to make friendships, to talk them into things, to looking for weakness. The weakness today is hitting a button. It's not needing money. It's hitting the wrong button and putting not you at risk, but everybody at risk. RSA emailed to 1,000 people. One guy clicked it. They almost went out of business. So when I'm on a panel and some educator says, you know, we spent 6 months training people in this company. Before the training, 30% of the people recognized a phishing email, and after the training, 60% recognized a phishing email. Good job, huh? And I say, not so much good job. 40% bad is still bad. But that's the world we're in. What it's going to take is students like the ones you're teaching. And it's why I come here recruiting, because you all have the best students in the world. These people are really bright. They're really innovative. They're really creative, and they are going to make a difference. And that's what we're looking for, because our generation didn't solve this problem. We created this problem. We need the next generation to figure out a way to make this country safe, to take us from being number 13 to number 1. I got a buddy who teaches at Tulsa. He came over from India, and he said, you know, this really pisses me off. I did not come to this country to be number 3 or number 10. I came here to be number 1. We got to straighten this out. I think he's right. We've got to get back to that position where we are the strongest country in the world. And you're training the kids that'll get us there. Thanks very much. Yeah, I never get questions. I never get planted questions. Go ahead.
So Dickie, how do we go from 13 to 1? What do we need to do? What would be the first steps that we need to take?
So we do exercises with the students, and it's how do we get from 13 to 1. We do exercises with students. These are the problem is these kids. Most of these kids in the military are kids that haven't gone to college. They don't have the training. The formal training. They may be decent with computers, but they don't understand the threat, they don't understand the risk, and they don't have the right kind of exercise training, because we don't have really knowledgeable people making up the exercises. The exercises are phony. You know, I told the story today with the kids. Eligible receiver. That was the first time we were invited to a war game to play the cyber aspect. So what did? We took control of the ships away from the guys. And we got kicked out of the exercise. They said, that's not fair. We said, what are you going to do when the Russians do that? Tell them it's not fair? They got to give control back? You're not taking this game seriously if you don't let us do that. That's what you got to prepare for. Same thing is true of any cyber exercise. When we run cyber exercises, we do tabletops, and everybody says things are going to happen that they aren't real. It's not really going to go that way. Every time we play a real game where I used to sit there with the director of Information Assurance, we say, let's pull the plug and see what happens. And it's like lighting a fire in a building. When you turn the stuff off, you know, when you have a fire drill, everybody walks out in nice order. If there's really a fire, what are people going to do? You don't know, which is really funny. You know, there are like 60 million commercial buildings in this country. And there's 6,000 fires a year. So that's like, what is that, 1 in 10,000 or something like the chance of getting fired. In cyber, every company's going to get hit this year. And yet they don't do a drill. Whenever we did that drill, things that we didn't expect to have happen happened. People reacted in ways nothing like what we told them to do, and nothing like what we expected them to do. It was weird. And you never knew why. It's like panic mode. But we don't try that. We don't exercise, and we don't train the people. And the people who are making up the military exercises don't know what real exercises are. They don't know what real events are. They don't understand the threat. They don't have role-based training. Everybody gets the same training. So, yeah.
I was curious when, I forget if it was during the election or after the election, but Trump was talking about the violation of the email servers and how maybe some of those things should go back to being carried by couriers instead of being electronic. And he got kind of made fun of for it because it was old-fashioned or whatever. But I'm curious, do you think there's any actual merit in going back to analog communication or things where physical copies are moved in terms of increasing security?
Well, there certainly is. You have to have that capability as a backup, because if things go down and we can't get them back up, you need to be able to communicate. You're not going back there as a primary. It's the functionality's just not there. Everybody's counting on the functionality. That's what sells. And to be honest, it's what makes us what we are. We're innovative, we're creative, and it's because of our ability to do things fast together. If you take that away, we just aren't the same country. So, my opinion. I don't. Yeah, my favorite student. Yes.
So back in the 70s, we had MAD.
We had what?
Mutual Assured Destruction.
Okay.
Is that?
I thought that was Mothers Against Drunks.
Do we have an equivalent approach today?
Not really. Part of the problem is that was the fact that it was a symmetric war. And, the adversary had the same thing to lose that we did. We'd say if you're going to say we're going to bomb Russia back to the Stone Age, that's a valid threat. If you say you're going to bomb a terrorist organization back to the Stone Age, it's not. They are not a target. How do you do that? That's the problem with the fact that the local high school can take down your grid. How do you punish the local high school? There is no. Hopefully, that's why when we ran the war exercise, I always made sure that a nuclear response was one of the options. Not because I thought it was realistic, but I knew that the adversary was going to get that war game. They were going to see it, and wanted them to see that the nuclear option was an option. It's too bad. Yes?
So you've mentioned a couple things that come into the individual person on their laptop. What would you say is the biggest national level threat we face in cyberwise?
So one of the big threats is we're too concerned with confidentiality and not enough with integrity. And integrity is what's going to kill you. If information is not like money. When you rob a bank and take money out, that money is gone. When you rob a company and take their IP, that IP is still there. They haven't lost it. They've just lost an advantage in some sense. But if you change the data, I'm not worried about somebody taking Wall Street down. They'll be back up. You won't notice it. But if people lose trust in the ability to make transactions on Wall Street, then the system will crumble. So the trust, the integrity, the trust that we have in the system, in the banking system, if you can't trust online banking, you don't do online banking, and everybody needs to be able to do online banking. So I think the integrity of the system is one of the big problems. The other problem is, of course, that cyber is a weapon, and you can do some pretty nasty things with it.
I guess I'm curious, so recently in the news, especially around the 2016 election, there was all this trouble about Hillary Clinton's emails, which has led to the FBI director's current trouble. I guess I'm wondering how you feel like the current policymakers understand kind of cybersecurity, and whether you think they're responsive enough to some of the things that you're doing now.
The current cyber czar understands cybersecurity. He's the first one that really has a good handle on it, but he's got a real strong background. He doesn't have the authority to do anything. In general, it appears that perfect example. Congress passes legislation on what DHS should do. They're supposed to protect the federal government. The last legislation said that they were doing a good job protecting the federal government from known threats, but they want now to protect from all unknown threats as well. Anybody who understands security in any sense knows you can't protect from unknown threats. That's ludicrous. So they don't understand it. I've briefed Congress in classified settings. In fact, we were doing an interesting briefing where we were showing them how vulnerable cell phones were. And the chair of the committee pulls the cell phone out of his pocket in a skiff and says, "You mean I shouldn't have this with me?" We're saying, yeah, that's kind of the whole point of this briefing. When it says you have to leave it outside, you really do have to leave it outside. There is a a feeling among the very powerful that they're above all those rules. And their convenience and ability to function is much more important than any of those rules. And, that happens. Yeah, so I don't think the understanding is there. I tell you, I was watching TV one time, and they had a cyber expert on. Did you ever watch these experts? They are so clueless. It's funny. So she was saying, and clearly she was not a cyber expert. She's saying, and this cloud stuff, your information is just off in the air somewhere. We don't know where it is. It's floating around up there. I'm thinking, really? This is the best you can do as a cyber expert? I actually haven't seen her on the air since then, so usually they come back. But I don't think you can come back from that one. Yeah.
I really like this idea that you proposed about cyber attack drills, but how feasible do you think it is? Like, what would it take? What would some of those drills look like, and what would it take to convince a company or something to pull the plug on them and do what everyone does?
I don't think I've got a snowball's chance of getting them to do that because they lose productivity. But you don't have to do it once a month. I'd be happy if they did it once.
Yeah.
So, we didn't do it very often because it was a lot of money. But it was also very instructive when you saw what happened. Some stuff that we never would have guessed.
To follow up thing about people at the top being above the rules.
Yeah.
That's just been background as part of my thing. And one speculation I've heard from friends is the reason Hillary Clinton had a private email server was because the State Department, IT department wasn't doing what she wanted. And she basically said, okay, I'm going to provision my own server because that it'll do what I want and they're in my way.
Yeah, I don't think that's right, because I think she set it up before she knew that the IT department wouldn't satisfy her. Yeah, that was a going in, not a coming out.
Well, I see that in industry where, security and crypto is like, gets in the way of the cloud.
I see that all the time. Yeah, security is a pain, and we have cross-domain solutions which are supposed to separate classified systems from unclassified, and there are 100 approved cross-domain solutions. But when we actually went out and look in the field, the most often used one is a wire because it happens to be convenient, cheap, easy, and it works. It doesn't do what it's supposed to do, but it gets the information across from one system to another. Yeah,
I think we've got time for one more question.
Oh, just a quick question. Are there books out there on this general topic that you recommend?
So Sean's got a good book. And it's really easy for me to recommend that one and not get in any trouble at all. It actually is very good. Sean Smith. I think that's his real name too. I had a friend who told me his name was Bob Smith, and we used to have a lot of meetings together. He worked at a different three-letter agency, but one time I was walking to another meeting with him. He said, "Okay, by the way, my name is Pete Driscoll for this group."